came in at 6:14 in the evening. I know the exact time because I was still in my work clothes, sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, going through invoices for my firm. My husband, who I'll call my husband because that's what he is, had just come home and was changing upstairs. When the phone rang and I saw it was my brother, I thought he was calling about Thanksgiving. We've been going back and forth about whose place this year. He wasn't calling about Thanksgiving. There's been an accident, he said, and his voice had that flat, careful quality that people use when they're trying not to panic. A guy ran a red light on Dundas. The front passenger side is gone. I didn't understand at first. I said, "What? Who?" "My car," he said. "I'm okay," I walked away. "But the paramedics want me to go in for a scan because I hit my head on the window and I was out for maybe 30 seconds. He paused. "They're taking me to St. Joe's." I was already standing. My husband heard my chair scrape and came to the top of the stairs in his socks. I held up one finger. "Wait," and said into the phone, Okay, I'm coming." "Did you call Mom and Dad?" "Yeah," my brother said. "I called them first." I told him I'd be there in 20 minutes. I grabbed my coat, told my husband what happened, and we were in the car before I'd even processed what was going on. St. Clodir. Joseph's hospital is 35 minutes from our house on a good night, but my husband drove and I spent the whole ride with my hands pressed flat on my thighs, trying to breathe normally. My brother is 4 years younger than me. He's 26. He still calls me when he needs his taxes done, when his landlord does something sketchy, when he gets a parking ticket and wants to know if he can fight it. He's not careless or dramatic. If he said he was out for 30 seconds and the paramedics wanted to scan, that was real. We pulled into the ER parking lot at 6,051. I texted my parents as we walked through the sliding doors. "Just arrived at St. Joe's. Where are you?" No answer. My brother was in a bay in the back, sitting up on the gurney with a white bandage above his right eyebrow and a bruise already coming up along his jaw. He looked pale, but he was alert, cracking jokes at the nurse, trying to ask her if he needed to keep the gown on or if that was optional. I hugged him carefully, and he winced a little on the left side where the seatbelt had dug in. "The CT's ordered," the nurse told us. "We're waiting for a slot. It shouldn't be long." My husband went to find the vending machine and get my brother something to eat. I sat in the plastic chair beside the gurney and held my brother's hand and tried to look calm, the way you do when you're the older one, and you need the other person not to see that your heart is in your throat. At 7,003, I texted my parents again. "He's in the ER. They're doing a CT scan. Are you coming?" At 7:22, my mother finally responded. "We're dealing with something right now. Is he awake?" I stared at that text for a long time. Is he awake? As if that were the threshold. As if my brother needed to be unconscious before it warranted their presence. I typed back, "Yes, he's awake. He was briefly unconscious at the scene. They need to rule out a brain bleed. What are you dealing with?" 3 minutes passed. Then my mother wrote, "Your sister got a letter from the CRA today. She's very upset. We're trying to help her figure it out." I read that 3 times. I set my phone face down on my knee, and I looked at my brother, who had closed his eyes, and I thought about what my mother had just said. My sister had received a letter from the Canada Revenue Agency. My brother had been in a car accident, was in an emergency room, was waiting for a CT scan to rule out bleeding in his brain, and my parents were at my sister's apartment helping her deal with a tax letter. I want to be careful here, because I've spent a long time trying to be fair to my parents. I've spent a long time making excuses for the ways they prioritize my sister over everyone else. She's the youngest, I've told myself. She had a harder time in school. She gets anxious. They worry about her more because she needs more help. I understood it, or I told myself I understood it. What I didn't expect, after 31 years of watching my sister's problems outrank everything else in our family, was to be sitting in an emergency room bay at 7-something on a Monday night with my brother's bandaged head while my parents stayed at her apartment because she'd gotten a letter. Not a diagnosis, not an emergency, a letter. I didn't respond to my mother's text. My husband came back with a package of peanut butter crackers and a Gatorade. My brother took the Gatorade, drank half of it, and made another joke about the gown. At 8,006, they took him for the CT. My husband and I sat in the waiting area outside the bay, and he held my hand, and I looked at the fluorescent ceiling, and I didn't tell him about my parents yet because I didn't have the words. The results came back clean. No bleed, no fracture. A grade 1 concussion. The ER doctor went through the discharge instructions, no screens for 48 hours, no driving, rest, someone with him that night, come back immediately if he had a headache that got worse instead of better, or if he vomited, or if anything felt wrong. Is there someone who can stay with you tonight? The doctor asked him. I'll stay, I said, or he comes to ours. We ended up driving my brother back to our place. He slept on the pull-out couch. My husband made him toast. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone and finally opened my parents' text thread. At 9:44, my mother had written, "Let us know when you hear something." At 10:32, my father, "How is he? Did they find anything?" I typed back, "He's fine. Concussion. He's with us for the night." Then I put my phone in my pocket and went to check on my brother. I didn't sleep much that night. My sister's CRA letter, I found out the next day from my mother when she called to check in, was a notice of reassessment. She'd filed her taxes late 2 years in a row and owed a small penalty, the kind you can call the CRA about, explain the circumstances, and often have reduced. It was not an audit. It was not a collections call. It was a standard administrative letter that my parents could have explained to her over the phone in 20 minutes, or that she could have called an accountant about, or that she could have dealt with herself, because she is 24 years old. The penalty was $290. I want to be clear. I'm not angry that my parents went to my sister when she was upset. I understand that she gets anxious and that she calls them when she's overwhelmed, and that they go. I understand the pattern. I've watched it my whole life. What I am, and I've spent a long time finding the right word for this, is finished. Because this wasn't the first time. It wasn't even close to the first time. 3 years ago, when I was in the middle of my articles at my law firm and working 70-hour weeks, and my husband and I were having a miscarriage. Our first, the one I've never fully talked about publicly. My mother didn't come. My sister was having a hard week. She'd broken up with someone she'd been seeing for 3 months, and she was sad, and my mother stayed with her and brought her soup, and watched movies on her couch. And I lay in a hospital bed with my husband beside me. And I called my mother twice and got her voicemail, and I understood. Because I had been conditioned to understand. 2 years ago, when I passed my bar exam, after 3 years of articling, after law school, after a decade of work, my parents came to dinner. But they spent most of it on their phones, because my sister had been in a minor fender bender on the way to the restaurant and was texting them updates from the side of the road. She was fine. Her car was fine. She was shaking and texting my parents every 4 minutes, and they kept checking their phones, and I sat across the table from them with my bar results framed on the wall behind me, and I cut my salmon into smaller and smaller pieces and said nothing. And the money. God, the money. I've been sending my parents $600 a month for the past 4 years. This started when my father had a health scare, a cardiac event that turned out to be minor, but that required some medications not fully covered by their benefits. And I said I'd help until they got stabilized. And then I kept helping because they didn't ask me to stop, and I didn't ask if they still needed it. And I think I kept doing it because it was the one thing I could do that felt concrete. I couldn't make them see me differently. I couldn't change the way they'd always arranged our family in some invisible hierarchy with my sister at the top. But I could send the money, and they always thanked me warmly when I did, and I needed that warmth, I think. My husband asked me once, about a year into it, whether my sister contributed anything. I told him she wasn't in a position to. He didn't push it, but I caught the look on his face and I stored it away. After my brother's accident, after the CT scan and the clean results and the night on my pull-out couch, I sat with what had happened for about 2 weeks. I turned it over. I made the excuses I always made. I told myself my parents were older and more reactive, that the anxiety around my sister was real even if the emergency wasn't, that maybe they genuinely hadn't understood how serious the situation was. And then one afternoon, I was at my desk at work and I pulled up my bank records and I went back 4 years and I added it up. $600 a month, 48 months, $28,800. I had sent my parents $28,800 in regular installments, without ever being asked where it went, without knowing whether my sister ever contributed a dollar, without knowing whether it had helped at all, or whether it had simply allowed them to not worry about the gap between their pension and their expenses, because they knew I was there every first of the month. I sat with that number for a long time. And then I went home and I told my husband everything. Not just the accident, not just the accident, all of it. The miscarriage, the bar exam dinner, the money. 4 years of transfers laid out in a spreadsheet I'd opened on my laptop at the kitchen table. He didn't say I told you so. He's not that kind of person. He asked me what I wanted to do. I told him I didn't know yet. What I did know was that I was coming up on my firm's annual partner reception. It's a big deal in the way these things are, the kind of event you dress up for, where clients come, where the senior partners give remarks about the year's work and highlight contributions from associates and junior partners. I'd been told, quietly, a few weeks earlier, that they were going to recognize me at this one. 5 years with the firm, a significant case that had resolved well, some pro bono work I'd led. Nothing too elaborate. Just to mention, a moment. The kind of acknowledgement that matters to you even when you're not sure why. My parents had been invited. I'd sent them the invitation myself, 3 weeks in advance, with the date and the address, and the note that it would mean a lot to me if they came. My sister had not been invited. It was a work event, not a family dinner, but I'd mentioned it to her too, so she'd know what was happening. The week before the event, my mother confirmed they'd be there. My father texted a thumbs up. I bought a new dress. My husband pressed his good suit. The night as a reception was a Thursday in early March, which in Toronto means cold and clear and the kind of dark that settles in fast. The event was at the firm's offices downtown, 16th floor, the good boardroom that they opened up for things like this. There were maybe 60 people, open bar, past appetizers, the kind of event where you make small talk with clients you've only emailed and try to remember the names of people's spouses. My parents arrived at 6015. I saw them from across the room and felt the thing I always feel when I see them in my professional world. A complicated pride, a wanting them to see me here. A hope. At 6:34, the senior partner started the remarks. The managing partner spoke for about 10 minutes about the year, and then they got to the individual recognitions. When they called my name, I walked up to the front of the room. The managing partner said some genuinely kind things. About the case. About the pro bono clinic I'd helped start. About what the next few years might look like for me at the firm. People clapped. My husband was in the third row, and he was smiling the way he smiles when he means it. I looked at my parents. My mother was looking at her phone. I don't mean she glanced at it. I mean she was reading something, her screen brightness up, her face tilted down. My father noticed me noticing and touched her arm. She looked up, saw me, and smiled. The smile of someone who has just realized they missed something and is trying to catch up. I smiled back. I stood at the front of that room with the managing partner's hand on my shoulder, and I kept my face completely neutral, and I smiled at my parents and I thought, I'm done. Not in the way I'd thought it before. The tired, resigned done that came with every unreturned phone call, every dinner where they checked their phones, every first of the month when I hit send on the transfer. I mean the kind of done where something crystallizes, where you stop waiting to be surprised. After the reception, my husband and I took my parents for a late dinner at a restaurant a few blocks from the office. Not the one they suggested, the nicer one they wanted on my tab, but a decent place with good food and good wine and a table in the back where we could talk. My mother said the remarks were lovely. My father said he was proud of me. I said, thank you. We ordered. We talked about my brother, who was fully recovered, back to work. Calling Mum to tell her he was fine. Because my brother is kind that way. At some point during the main course, my mother said, it's so nice that the firm does events like this. Do you think they'll make you a full partner soon? And I said, I don't know. That's still a few years out. And she said, well, you work so hard. You deserve it. And then she took a sip of her wine and said, oh, I meant to ask. We're a little tight this month. Is there any chance you could do $800 instead of $600? Just for March. I set down my fork. My husband went very still in the way he goes, still when he's heard something he wants me to handle. I looked at my mother and I said, I'm actually going to stop the transfer, starting this month. She blinked. What? The $600 a month, I said. I'm stopping it. I should have had this conversation sooner. My father put down his glass. I wasn't cruel. I didn't read out the spreadsheet. I didn't list everything that had happened. The accident, the miscarriage, the bar exam dinner, the phone at the reception. I didn't do any of that, but I told them clearly that I had been sending that money for 4 years, and I had never once asked where it went or whether it was still needed, and that I needed to stop, and that I was sorry I hadn't said it sooner. My mother said, we count on that. I said, I understand. I'll send this month's since it's already the 3rd, but after that it'll need to stop. My father said, can we talk about this? I said, we can talk, but my answer isn't going to change. It was uncomfortable. The rest of dinner was uncomfortable. They were hurt and surprised, and my mother was quiet in a way that meant she was working through something. We said goodbye outside on the sidewalk in the cold, and I hugged them both and I meant it. Because I love my parents. I do. This is the complicated part that people don't always understand about these situations. You can love someone and be finished. Those two things don't cancel each other out. In the car on the way home, my husband reached over and held my hand. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, how do you feel? I thought about it. Cold, I said. And then, but good. I feel good. My brother called me 2 days later. My mother had told him about the dinner, and he wanted to know if I was okay. I told him when I told our parents, without the spreadsheet, without the history. He was quiet for a minute, and then he said, honestly, I'm glad. I've wanted to say something for years. I asked him why he added. He laughed a little. I didn't want to be the one to say it. I thought you knew. I knew, I said. I just wasn't ready. My sister called a week later. She was hurt, she said. She felt like I was punishing the whole family because I was stressed about work. I listened. I didn't argue. I said, I'm not punishing anyone. I just needed to stop doing something that wasn't working. She said, but Mom and Dad count on it. I said, I know, and they'll need to figure that out. She didn't have an answer for that, and after a moment, the conversation moved on. It has been 4 months. I still talk to my parents. I went to their place for Easter. My mother made the lamb she always makes, and we sat around the table, and my sister was there and my brother was there, and it was fine. Genuinely fine the way things can be when the expectation has been reset. My father made a point of asking about a case I'd mentioned. My mother told me I looked tired in the way she's always told me I looked tired, and somehow it didn't land the same way. What changed wasn't that they changed. What changed was that I stopped waiting for it. My husband and I are saving the $600 a month now. After 4 months, that's $2,400. After a year, it'll be $7,200. We haven't decided what to do with it yet. We've talked about the future, about travel, about other things we keep putting off. There's no rush. It will be there when we're ready. I don't think I'll ever fully stop wanting my parents to see me the way I've always wanted to be seen. I think that's just the cost of loving people who love you imperfectly. But I know the difference now between waiting for something and accepting that it isn't coming. And I know what it feels like to sit at a table in a restaurant in March and say a clear, kind, final thing and mean every word of it. My daughter, she's 3, asked me last week where Grandma and Grandpa were because she'd seen a photo of them on the fridge. I said, they're at their house. We'll see them soon. She thought about that for a second and then said, okay, and went back to her crackers. That's the thing about kids. They don't need the whole story. They just need to know it's okay. It's okay. There's a version of this story where I'm the villain. I know that. I sent money for 4 years without being asked to stop, and then I stopped without warning at a dinner table in March and called it a boundary. My sister would probably tell it that way. Maybe my mother would too, on a bad day. But here's what I've come to understand. Slowly, the way you understand things that take a long time to hurt, the way we treat people when it costs us something, is the only honest data we have about what we actually value, not what we say at Christmas dinner, not the cards, the phone we look at during someone else's moment, the letter we prioritize over the ER. Those are the real answers, and for a long time, I kept refusing to read them. I think about my brother sitting up on that gurney with the bandage above his eyebrow, cracking jokes at the nurse, because that's what he does when he's scared. He called our parents first. He assumed they would come. That assumption that your family will show up when it counts is one of the most fundamental things a person can carry. And when it turns out not to be true, something recalibrates. It has to. What I learned from all of this, if I'm being honest, is that kindness without clarity isn't kindness. It's just a habit you haven't examined. I was a good daughter in all the measurable ways. I sent the money. I showed up. I never made a scene, but I wasn't being honest. Not really. I kept absorbing things that should have been named, and the longer I absorbed them, the more I convinced myself the problem was my expectations, not the pattern. That's not wisdom. That's just exhaustion, dressed up as patience. And the money. $28,800 over 4 years. That number doesn't make me angry anymore. What it makes me is clear-eyed. I gave it because I wanted to be the person who could give it. I wanted to matter in a way I could measure. That's a human thing, not a shameful thing. But at some point, you have to ask whether the giving is doing what you hoped it would do. And as the honest answer is no, you have to be brave enough to stop. Not out of punishment, out of honesty. My daughter is 3. She doesn't understand any of this yet, and I'm glad. What I want her to grow up knowing, not from a lecture, but from watching how we live, is that showing up for people is a choice you make again and again, and it matters every single time. That understanding a situation clearly, without the fog of wanting things to be different, is one of the most useful things you can develop. And that changing something difficult at a dinner table in March with your voice steady and your hands in your lap is its own kind of strength. Not the loud kind, the quiet, final kind. I'm okay. My brother's okay. My husband is genuinely the reason I got through the last year without becoming someone I didn't recognize. And my parents, I saw them at Easter. My mother made lamb. We sat around the table and it was fine. That's the thing nobody tells you about these endings. They're not always dramatic. Sometimes they just look like Easter dinner, with the good dishes out and everyone being a little more careful, and a version of okay that's smaller than you wanted, but more honest than what came before. I'll take it.